Andy, how far apart are the Mets and Alonso right now?
You know, that's a tough thing probably to define, Sal, in terms of like one's here and one's here, because I'm sure all kinds of different concepts have been tossed around and discussed, both internally and between the sides. So I'll answer that question by saying a couple of numbers that I think make sense to both sides, which probably could give you a sense of why he hasn't signed with the Mets or anywhere else yet. I think 138 million is a number that could mean something to Alonso, because as we know, he turned down 158 from the Mets about a year and a half ago. He made about 20 last year, so then that kind of erases that. That's a contract that I don't know that he's going to reach in this industry right now. But if you're the Mets and you're just looking at the general aging curve and the trajectory of Alonso's performance over the past couple of years, you might be more comfortable with a really high average annual value, 25, 30 million, shorter term deal, a couple of years, maybe some opt-outs. So those are pretty different concepts. And there's really no reason on January 2nd, as we sit here, for either side to accept something that's like way not what they want. So I think that's probably a decent summary conceptually of where we might be.
Wow, so it sounds like there's some more cooking to do on this.
Sounds like it.
Yeah, well, that's unfortunate because the Mets are in serious need of a big bat. Sal, you nailed it. They need some protection in that lineup. They just spent $750 million on Juan Soto. I think at some point they need to come to an agreement with Pete and get him in there. I mean, I wrote down some names for their lineup. If you want to go this way, start off with Lindor, then you got Soto, then you got Vientos batting third, and then your cleanup hitter is Brandon Nimmo. I don't love it.
Yeah.
I want somebody else in there and pushing Nimmo down a little bit. I mean, I still think he's going to contribute and all of that sort of stuff, but I think that they need more offense. You know, the Dodgers have made some serious statements this winter, and if your goal really is to get to the World Series, that's who you're competing with.
Yeah.
And you know, you're also competing with the Phillies, who have a huge rotation. The Braves can never be counted out. There's a lot in the Mets' way to get to where they want to go. Adding bats is going to do it.
Yeah, and by the way, I don't even love Pete necessarily. My first choice would have been Soto and Adames. All the other options are off the board. Adames obviously went off the board before Soto. Now plan B has got to be Pete, and there are no options behind him. So if it's not Pete, then who? They're kind of in a spot where they need Pete Alonso back.
Which is why ultimately, gun to my head, I think they probably get something done. So I don't mean to be too doom and gloom in what I laid out to begin with. But I just think if you look at where they're coming from, they probably have some work to do.
Let's make the call to the bullpen and welcome in Jim Duquette. Jim, where do you think the Mets and Alonso stand right now?
You know, I agree with Andy and what he just said. You know, I think there's definitely some work to do. You know, what concerns me a little bit is starting to hear some other names kind of creep in there. And sometimes that is, you know, a ruse that's thrown out there by the Boras Corporation. But you heard the Giants last week. You hear the Angels today. And I'm not saying Pete wants to go to either of those spots to the West Coast. But those teams are definitely, you know, something to at least keep in mind. And listen, Corbin Burns is a good example of one of those things where the Giants thought they had the inside track. They made the biggest offer. They were sitting around. They wouldn't go any further, and he ends up signing somewhere else. And Pete could very easily do the same thing. So back to your point, Sal, like they need Pete at this point in this lineup. There's no question on that. So, you know, I think at some point, you know, you might see, you know, the owner push towards the end and kind of push this over the finish line like he did with Nimmo, even if it has to happen here in the month of January, a little bit later in January. But right now, I feel like that both teams are kind of playing with a little bit of fire. The Mets don't want to go much further. Pete's starting to look at some other teams. I don't like the feel of either of it, and that's why I feel like this is something that maybe they should be finding some middle ground and get this thing done.